Good evening, and welcome to Dark Historian. You're in a quiet place now, made for slow stories, soft thoughts, and peaceful sleep. Turn down the lights, get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let the day gently fade away. Tonight, we'll explore the quieter side of history, simple lives, strange old customs, and forgotten moments that shaped the world in quiet ways. If this calm journey brings you peace or helps you rest, feel free to like or subscribe, only if it feels. Right now, close your eyes, and let's begin. Story 1. Daggers in the Shadows. The miserable life of a medieval assassin in the alley, waiting you crouch behind a stack of rain-damp barrels. Your breath quiet, almost imperceptible, your fingers stiff from the cold. It's just after dusk. The sun has bled out behind the rooflines of the city, and what remains is a smudged, grey light that makes everything feel older than it is. The cobblestones beneath your feet are uneven and cold. You shift your weight slowly, quietly, so as not to clatter your dagger against the buckle of your belt. There is no glory in this. No cheers from a rapturous crowd. No plumes on your cap or theatrical gestures. You are not an agent of fate, nor a master of shadows. You are a man with sore legs, a knotted stomach, and boots that never quite fit, and you are waiting. This is the forgotten truth of the assassin's craft in medieval Europe. It was not stylish, nor mystical, nor noble. It was often grubby, filled with poor pay, poor tools, and worse employers. Whether in the service of a petty noble, a merchant with a vendetta, or a religious order dabbling in clandestine punishment, most assassins were men drawn from the very edges of society. You were invisible because you were nothing, and that was what made you useful. Tonight, your target is a clerk, not a warlord, nor a traitor, nor even a soldier, but a man who counts barrels for a trading guild and knows something he should not. He has made himself an inconvenience, and in doing so, he has placed his name on a crumpled bit of parchment slipped to your handler. 2 nights ago, you don't know what the clerk looks like. You've only been told that he wears a green felt cap and always stops at the tavern on Pock Street before walking home. You know the path. You've walked it yourself, once during daylight, to count how many doors along the alley might open. Unexpectedly, you made a map in your mind. The angles of escape, the creaking hinges, the dog that barks at everything. But you do not know his name. That's part of the job. You are not meant to know. A name is too much of a connection. It softens the hand. It weakens the resolve. It turns a job into a sin. And sin is expensive. You weren't trained, not formally. No one is. There is no academy for assassins in this world. Only the rough guidance of those who have survived long enough to give a word of advice. Poison's quiet, but it takes time. One man once told you over a broken loaf of barley bread, the pointy end is faster, but messy, and never wear bells. That man had died a week later, choked in the mud behind a cathedral after missing his mark. Your training, if you could call it that, has been shaped by necessity and repetition, learning how to stand perfectly still, how to breathe without sound, how to feign drunkenness in a crowd, how to avoid leaving footprints in wet soil, how to wipe a blade clean with one swift flick. It's less about death and more about silence. You glance up at the rooftops. No archers, not that there ever would be, but you check all the same. Across the street, a door opens. A woman throws out the day's dirty water. It splashes in the gutter, steaming faintly. You flinch instinct, but she doesn't see you. No one ever sees you when you don't want them to. That is both your curse and your comfort. Your belt pouch is nearly empty. The advance you received was barely enough to buy a new blade, let alone a hot meal. After this job, your handler has promised you something better. A contract from a nobleman, he said. Real money. Maybe a place to stay. But that's what he said last time, and the time before that. The problem isn't the work it. The waiting, assassination, in this age, is 90% patience. You can spend days watching a window, tracing a schedule, counting how many times a man visits the latrine. Sometimes the job never even happens. The mark is gone, fled to another city, or he was warned, or someone else got to him first. And you, unpaid, have nothing to show for your silence but the windburn on your face and the cramp in your legs. You've been standing here for nearly an hour now. The alley smells of damp straw and rotten apples. A cat slinks past, unbothered. You envy it. Eventually, you see the green cap. It bobs along like a leaf in a stream, weaving slightly. The man beneath it is thinner than you expected, slighter. He walks with a bit of a limp. You note this because it means he's unlikely to run far if it comes to that. You wait until he passes, then, with the ease of long habit, you step into the street and follow. Not closely, a gap of 10 paces, maybe 12. Enough to vanish if he turns, close enough to act if the alley narrows. Your boots make no sound. You've wrapped the soles in thin leather straps to soften the step. Your hand rests near the dagger. At your belt, fingers light. There is no thrill in this, only routine. The man turns a corner. You follow, then footsteps, not his. Behind you, fast, you tense. Not a watchman, they whistle. Not a drunkard, too regular. Not good. You slip into a doorway just as two figures pass behind you. One of them looks familiar, too familiar. A rival, possibly worse. The guild does not tolerate competition, but that doesn't mean others don't try. You curse silently. The job may already be lost. You wait, count to 30, emerge. The man with the green cap is gone. Just like that. This is the life, and the failure there will be no pay tonight. You return to the barrels. Sit. Pull your cloak tight. The wind has picked up. Somewhere in the distance, church bells mark the hour. You do not know what hour, only that it is later now. Your handler will be disappointed, or angry, or indifferent. It's hard to tell. You think of the clerk, home. Now, probably none the wiser. You wonder what he knows, and why someone wants him gone. But you never ask, and that is where we'll pause. The guild, the grime, and the glove, the next morning begins. As always, not with the rising sun, but with the sound of someone coughing behind a wall that isn't yours. You don't live anywhere officially. Few in your line of work do. Your current dwelling is a corner of a crumbling tenement near the tanner's yard, rent paid in coin and silence. The floorboards are warped. The walls are damp. The mattress is little more than a sack of rags. But it's warm enough, and the mold hasn't crept past the ceiling beams. You count that as a kind of fortune. You rise slowly, body stiff, bones quietly protesting the cold. Your boots are still damp from last night's chase. There's a smear of ash on your sleeve from leaning too close to the brazier. Your dagger sits beside your cot, wrapped in a linen cloth, never left exposed, never unsheathed unless it must be, today. You must report to the guild, not a guild in the legal sense, not like the carpenters or candle makers with their banners and feast. Days. No, this is a guild of another kind, unregistered, unwelcome, and deeply inconvenient to the powers that be. But it exists, and in some towns, like this one, it thrives. The Assassin's Guild is not a place of whispered oaths or carved insignias. It's a ledger in a locked drawer, a nod in a tavern, a booth in the market that sells inkpots and forgets. Your name, it is older than the crown, perhaps, or at least older than the one currently wearing it. And it is run not by men in cloaks, but by men in gloves, like the one you're going to see today. You wrap your scarf around your face and slip into the street. The air is sharp. Frost clings to the iron hinges of every gate. You pass a row of butchers preparing for market, their red sleeves steaming, their breath like smoke. No one notices you. Not really, and that's how it should be. The guild maintains no formal headquarters. Instead, it meets wherever it is least expected. Today, that place is the basement of a defunct bathhouse, 3 streets past the charcoaler's shed. You rap on the door 4 times, slow and deliberate. A small slot opens. No words are exchanged. You step inside. It smells of stone and mildew. The stairs descend steeply. You're greeted not by warmth, but by a sallow man in a grey tunic with gloves of soft oiled hide. His name is Trestle, or so he says. You don't know his real name. No one does. That's not part of the arrangement. He offers you a seat-a-stool, hard and cold. You hand over a scrap of parchment with the job mark, a green cap, a date, a time. You say nothing. He reads. Then, slowly, he looks up. His gloves squeak slightly as he folds the paper. Missed him. You nod. He nods too. Rival. You nod again. Do we know who? You shrugged. This is how most of your meetings go. Sparse, practical, clipped. The guild does not tolerate excessive speech. The fewer words exchanged, the fewer lies to remember. Trestle reaches under the table and places a crust of bread and a tin cup of broth before you. That's your payment today. Not in coin, but sustenance. Enough to carry you to the next contract. As you eat, quietly. Hunched, he speaks again. There's another mark, he says, but this one's different. Clergy. You look up. Clergy jobs are rare, risky. Not because the clergy are hard to reach. They aren't, but because the consequences ripple far beyond the act. A priest's death could mean a trial, or worse, a sermon. Interested, he asks. You nod slowly. He slides another scrap of parchment across the table. This one is marked with a single sigil, a stylized glove. No names, he reminds you, only gloves. That's how the guild works. Marks are assigned by glove color brown. For commoners, grey for merchants, white for nobility, red for clergy. Black is never spoken of. You slide the parchment into your sleeve and rise. The bathhouse echoes behind you as you climb the stairs. The daylight hits your face like a rebuke. You are not welcome here, not truly. The city tolerates your kind only. So long as you remain unseen. You head to the laundress. Your cloak, soaked from last night, must be cleaned. You cannot afford to smell like the alley. The laundress does not ask what you do. She washes blood from many garments and never asks whose. You leave your cloak, take a spare, and move on. The next part of your day is slower, more observant. You visit the cathedral, not to pray, but to watch. The target is a priest named Alric. You know only his robes, gold-trimmed, fraying at the hem. He has a fondness for sweet wine and misplaces his books often. You note these things because they will matter. You sit on the cold stone bench outside the apothecary, facing the cathedral's side entrance. From here, you count the paces from the door to the vestry. You note the slant of the roof, the creak of the third step, the fact that Alric's left shoe is worn unevenly. All of it becomes part of the plan. This, more than the kill, is your craft, noticing what others do not. You could have been a spy, a tracker, a hunter, but this is the path that opened, and you step through it. The sun begins to set. A bell chimes somewhere. You feel the hunger, again not of the body, but of the job unfinished. A job delayed is a job unpaid. You return to your quarters, open the floorboard, and take out your tools, dagger, cloth, a small vial of something brown and bitter. You check the blade's edge against your thumb, sharp but not nicked. You polish it anyway. You sleep, eventually, curled around your pack like a street dog. There is no warmth. In your room, save for your own, you dream of nothing. We'll pause here, in the cold quiet of the assassin's world. One clean cut, and out you wake before dawn. There's no alarm, no bell, only instinct. It's a dull pressure behind your eyes. The kind of awareness that settles in the bones after years of moving through alleys and avoiding doors that creak. Outside, the sky is still dark enough to be mistaken for night, but the birds are beginning soft trills, uncertain calls. Today is the day. You dress in silence, rolling your leggings tight and binding your tunic with the cord that never quite stays in place. The spare cloak from the laundress smells faintly of lye and lavender, trace of someone else's life. Your boots, dry now, still carry the memory of last night's failure. You eat a bit of hard cheese and flatbread, nothing more. You need to move lightly. The priest will give his sermon just after second bell. That gives you time. You pass through the back alley's paths you know by heart. One leads to the bakery, another to the brewer's yard, where the barrels lie stacked and forgotten. You note the position of the watch this morning. 2 men near the armory, one posted near the south gate. Unusual, but not alarming. The cathedral rises ahead, grey and soft edged in the early light. Inside, the air smells of damp stone, wax, and lilies. The candles are fresh, the nave is still empty. You slip behind a pillar and wait. This is what no one understands about your work. It's not about violence. It's about waiting. Patience is a blade in itself, sharpened over hours, honed on silence. Most of your day, most of your life, is spent in this state of not doing. The strike is only a heartbeat. Everything else is preparation. Eventually, movement. A deacon arrives, sweeps the floor with a handmade broom. A few townsfolk enter, whispering their prayers toward indifferent saints. You study each of them, just in case. Then comes the priest, Ulrich. He's younger than you expected, and softer. His robes are faded where they brush the stone, and his eyes are red with poor sleep. He mutters as he walks, probably reciting the day's reading. He pauses near the altar, bows crosses himself, then steps through the side door to the vestry. You follow, not immediately. First, you count 1, 2, 3, 4. Time for him to hang his outer cloak. Time for him to lay the holy book on the stand. Time to forget that death can come in the morning to dot you past the doorway like a shadow. No creak, no breath. Inside, it's a small room. Shelves of books, a bench, a cup of ink drying in its pot. The window is narrow, its light pale. He's alone. You draw the blade. He turns, perhaps from instinct, perhaps from sound. His eyes widen. He begins to speak. A question, maybe. You never hear it. One step forward. One clean cut. It's quiet. That's what matters. Not the blood, not the expression, not the silence that follows. Only that it is done quickly. You wipe the blade on the hem of your own tunic and step back into the shadows. You are gone before the bell rings. The body won't be discovered until the first candle is lit for the sermon. A small crowd will murmur. Some will cross themselves. Others will whisper that it was his heart. Few will ask questions. Fewer still will want answers. And you will already be gone. Back through the alleys. Back to the bathhouse. The door opens. For you again. This time, Tressel looks up only briefly before placing a coin purse on the table. Not heavy, but heavier than usual. Clean, you nod. No one saw. You shake your head. Good. He slides the purse across. You pocket it without counting. You never count. It's better that way. Then something unusual. Tressel opens a small drawer and pulls out a glove. A white one. Your stomach knots. You've been noticed, he says, not unkindly. The nobleman, he's pleased. You say nothing. You'll leave tomorrow. North, a new town. Better quarters, better pay. Still, you say nothing. This is the reward, they say, to ascend. To serve those in silk instead of those in rags. But in truth, it's just another kind of leash. You'll still crouch in alleys, still eat stale bread, still vanish before anyone can thank you. You leave with the glove in your pouch. That night, in your room, you sit with it in your palm. It is soft, far softer than your own. White, yes, but frayed at the wrist. Used dot, and you wonder not, for the first time, if there is any other life for you. If a man who has learned only how to vanish can ever hope to be seen. But that is not a question for tonight. You lie down, your blade sleeps. Beside you, the city hums beyond the wall, and soon only silence remains. Let's now wander into a different time, a different place. Story 2, Scrolls, Seals, and Sore Eyes. The painfully slow work of a Thames Dynasty tax clerk waking before the rooster. You wake before the rooster. Because the rooster does not understand bureaucracy. The room is dim, lit only by the pale glow of pre-dawn mist pressing against the oiled paper window. The mat beneath you is thin, its straw stuffing uneven from years of quiet sleep and quiet waking. Your robe, neatly folded beside you, still smells faintly of camphor and ink. You are a clerk in the fiscal bureau of the Tang dynasty, not a minister, not a magistrate, just a clerk. One of dozens in the Eastern Branch office of the Board of Revenue. You have no titles beyond scribe, no horses, no land, but you do have a lacquered desk, 3 bamboo brushes, a quota of lamp oil, and a seat assigned but not guaranteed. The rooster finally calls from the alley below. A second follows. The city is beginning to stir. Chang'an, grand capital of the empire, will soon be thick with cartwheels, market cries, temple bells, and the long shuffle of civil servants men like you heading toward their ledgers. You dress quickly. You recite the short verse you wrote for yourself years ago. Ink flows. Mind follows. Errors rest in shame. It is not a particularly good verse, but it reminds you not to miss decimal points. Breakfast is plain. A bowl of rice gruel, 1 pickled turnip. You eat quickly, careful not to spill broth on your sleeves, your only robe. For the week, washed every 6th day, and dried over pine branches. You leave your home with a brush tucked behind your ear. The street is damp and grey. Market stalls are being uncovered. A girl scatters bean husks to keep the dust down. 2 boys argue over dried plums. Somewhere, a temple drum sounds once soft, low, distant. You arrive at the bureau compound. It is a walled structure with 3 gates. You use the side entrance, as you are neither senior nor particularly well favored. Inside, there are no statues or silk drapes, only hallways of worn stone and the rhythmic creak of sandals over cedar floorboards. Your workroom is shared. With 6 others, there is a strict seating order, established years ago and never questioned. You are 5th. Your desk is closest to the drafty window, which means cold hands in winter and ink that dries too fast in summer. You sit, you bow to the inkstone, you begin. The first task is copying. Each day, a batch of tax reports arrives from the province's bamboo scrolls tied with red twine. Each report includes figures from town granaries, pig counts, rice yields, silk quotas, salt tariffs, and transit taxes. Your job is to transcribe each scroll into 2 new copies, one for storage, one for imperial. Review.you do not correct the numbers. You are not a checker, you are a repeater. The ink flows, the hand cramps. You stop only when the brush tip splits, or when the lamp oil sputters out. At midday, a bell chimes. You are permitted a brief meal, cold dumplings with bean paste, eaten. Behind the ledger rack, you do not speak. Talking invites reprimands, and besides, everyone is too tired to care. Your back aches. Your eyes sting. The numbers blur sometimes, especially when 2 villagers submit identical pig counts. But you do not ask questions. Once, years ago, you mentioned a suspicious silk entry aloud. The man who heard you was reassigned to the salt flats. You prefer ink to brine after lunch. The second task begins, the seal test. Each document copied must be matched to an official seal from the issuing prefecture. The seals, bronze, round, engraved with dragons or clouds, are stored in a locked cabinet. You retrieve them one by one, compare them against impressions in red wax, and restamp your copy before it is bundled and tied with fresh string. The seals are heavy. Some still smell faintly of lacquer. One of them is slightly cracked, but no one dares mention it. The day wanes by dusk. Your hands are blotched with ink. Your fingertips bear faint red circles from pressing seal to wax. You have copied 15 scrolls. The quota is 12, so you will not be scolded, but neither will you be praised. The senior clerk, whose robe bears 2 embroidered cranes, walks the length of the room. He stops at your desk, glances once at your copy, and moves on. That is the highest form of approval you've known. As night falls, the scribes light lamps, small bowls of oil with short reeds as wicks. The smell is sharp, familiar. You breathe through it. Outside, the city glows faintly with lanterns. Merchants close their stalls. Poets begin to recite at the wine shops. But you remain at your desk, transcribing. At some point, the bell sounds again. Work ends. You clean your brush. You roll your scrolls. You bow once more to the inkstone. The walk home is slower. Your legs are stiff. Your mind is still full of rice, head counts of goats, barrels of salted fish. When you return to your room, it is dark. The brazier is out. You curl under your blanket which smells of dust and rice straw. Sleep comes not suddenly, but eventually. You dream, vaguely, of a goat that owes the emperor 15 coins. The empire's most boring bird and you rise the next morning with a crick in your neck. The rooster sounds, again though now. It feels less like a companion and more like a mocking little bureaucrat with feathers. You groan softly as you sit upright. On your mat, rubbing at the spot just behind your shoulder that seems to hold all of your professional frustrations. The sun is not yet up, but neither is it far. You ladle cold water into a basin and splash your face. It's June, and the humidity has arrived. Your robe, which was barely dry last night, is already damp again. The ink on your sleeve cuff wear. Your hand rests as you write has left smudges from yesterday's work. You sigh, there is no room for complaint, not in this line of work. You remind yourself, gently, that you are fortunate. There are farmers who bend their backs until they break. Porters who carry firewood until their knees collapse. You, by contrast, only carry numbers, but numbers have their own weight. You eat more gruel, a salted plum if you're lucky. Then you tuck your daily supplies into your satchel brushes, inkstick, blotting cloth, then begin the walk once more to the fiscal bureau. Outside, the early morning haze has already begun to lift. Along the avenue of blossoming pagoda trees, vendors set up trays of dumplings and steamed buns. The scent is tempting, but you've learned not to eat too much before work. Full stomachs make for sloppy columns dotted the bureau. The hall is already filling with murmurs and the soft sound of sandaled feet on dry wood. You nod silently to the same 6 men you see each day. Their robes are also wrinkled, also damp. One has an ink stain under his left eye that he hasn't noticed. Your desk is the same. Your posture the same. Your task the same. The only thing that changes are the numbers and the mistakes. Today, you've been given a new batch. Reports from the outer prefectures of the Shu, Regent far to the west, where the mountains breathe clouds and the rice harvest arrives late. The scrolls are brittle, the characters uneven. Some were clearly written in haste, perhaps on horseback. You squint at the first entry. Village of River Holotax remittance. 487 catties rice. 39 bolts silk. 7 head pig. 1 debt unresolved see addendum. Addendums are the worst. The scroll creaks as you unwind further, revealing a second sheet affixed hastily with paste. It reads, 1 household absent name Fan, Kiomsing 3 months. Crops unharvested. Pig stolen. Cause unknown. You sigh. Again, there is no code for pig stolen. You must record it under unaccounted livestock. You dip your brush in ink, align the bamboo slips, and begin transcribing. You write slowly, carefully. There's no prize for speed. Here only reprimands for smudges, for wrong digits, for forgetting the correct honorific for a 6th rank headman. Mid-morning arrives. The lamp oil runs low, so you use the daylight instead. It flickers and changes. Through the window as clouds pass, making your shadows dance across the page. Outside, the city hums. Somewhere far off, an imperial courier gallops through the east gate. Someone else is riding a cart laden with firewood. Someone else is burying his sandals in the rice paddies. You are still here. Scratching ink onto bamboo dot later, you're summoned to assist with the error wall. This is a quiet punishment. Each week, clerks whose work is found to be incomplete or inaccurate are asked to sit before the error walla board on which a copy of their mistake is publicly displayed. Today, it's not your name, but someone else's. You watch as another scribe, a younger man with a trembling hand, is called forward. His mistake, transposing 480 bolts as 840 bolts. The difference will be noticed by some distant logistics officer 2 provinces away, but the punishment begins here. He bows, he takes the chalk stick. He writes a short apology beneath his miswritten line. The room is silent. You glance down at your own scroll, heart faintly thudding. You have not made that error yet, but your fingers tremble more often these days. You cannot afford to be careless. When you return to your seat, you copy slower. The work stretches on into afternoon. Another shipment arrives, this time from the salt regions in Zhongnan. Their writing is thick and blocky, their seals pressed, too hard into wax. One document has melted slightly in the heat. You cannot read half the digits. You ask, politely, for a new copy. You are told, gently, to make do, so you guess. Carefully, you mark your copy with a dot beside the uncertain number. You pray no one notices, or if they do, that they forgive. As evening approaches, a steward brings the lamp oil. You refill your bowl. The scent burns your nostrils, but you are used to it now. You finish the day's quota just as the bell sounds. Outside, dusk has painted the street with soft gold and violet. You walk slowly. Your shoulders ache. When you reach your home, a neighbor offers you a small slice of melon. She grows them in pots on her balcony. You thank her, then sit beside your window and eat slowly. As the moon rises, you pull out a scrap of parchment, not for work, but for a poem. You write, brush thin, wrist slow. The emperor shall never know. You laugh to yourself, just a little. Not much, just enough to remember you are still a person. Then you blow out your lamp and sleep. A life measured in ink and margin, the days begin to blur. Each morning feels like the one before. Each scroll carries the same faint scent of old glue and travel dust. And each line of ink, however precise, however careful, vanishes into a vault, a shelf, a long-forgotten compilation. But you still write them. You have now worked as a scribe for 9 years and 4 months. You know this not because anyone is counting, but because you keep a single tally mark on a scrap of silk, hidden behind your desk drawer. It is not for pride. It is simply a way to remember that time moves, even when it does not feel like it. The fiscal bureau remains unchanged. The wooden floors creak in the same places. The cracked seal has still not been replaced, and the ink blot on your colleague's robe has spread like a tiny map, perhaps of a province that no longer exists. But occasionally, something shifts. Today, a courier arrives from Luoyang with a special notice. A new tax code has been issued by the central board. It is not sweeping, just a clarification. Really, but it means that every document involving barley tithes must be updated, not redone, not reissued, but appended. You are assigned to the addendum team. This is considered a minor promotion. It comes with a sturdier brush and slightly better lamp oil. It also comes with responsibility. Your notes will be affixed to thousands of scrolls across the empire. If your pen slips now, confusion will ripple outward like a pebble in still water. You sit at your news station, which smells faintly of camellia wood. The scrolls pile high. Each bears the same neat correction. Barley now assessed at 70 per moo, not 60. You write it dozens of times, hundreds. The phrase burns itself into your hand. Sometimes your mind wanders. You think about who receives these scrolls, who reads your careful characters. A provincial accountant in a office, a young clerk in a silk trading port, fanning himself in the southern heat. Do they notice your penmanship? Do they curse it? Does the emperor ever read a single line? You doubt it, but still, you copy. You append. You measure your brushstrokes like breath siege. One practiced, smooth, inevitable, later in the week. You are invited quietly and without ceremony to sit in on the tabulation hall. This is the chamber where all data from the regions is gathered, sorted, and collated. You've heard of it, but never seen it. It is larger than you expected. Scrolls are stacked 10, 20 deep on lacquered tables. Assistants sit cross-legged beside them, whispering figures to each other. A scribe at the far end calls out the grain totals for Shaanxi. Another, older man adjusts weights on a brass scale, comparing yield estimates to tribute obligations. And there, at the center of the hall, is the master ledger. It's an enormous roll of silk nearly 15 paces long, mounted on wooden spools and carefully inked by the senior scribes. Each district, each product, each seasonal variance is noted in tightly packed columns. You watch, silently, as one of the entries is corrected with a stroke so light you can barely see it. It is strange. All your years, you've copied fragments, slips, and scrolls, and scraps. But here is the whole tapestry. You feel, for the first time, the shape of it, how the taxes from a village you've never seen connect to another far away. How one clerk's careful ink might shape another's decision to provinces down. It's like seeing the shadow of a city you live in, but never fully grasped. Afterward, you return to your desk. Your hand moves a little slower, a little steadier. You realize the work isn't meaningless. It's just ... quiet, invisible. You begin noticing things. How your fingers are slightly calloused where the brush rests, how you now automatically correct your ink ratio without thinking. How you've memorized the seals for 16 prefectures just by feel. You are not young anymore, but not old. You've begun training an apprentice Li Jun, a boy with messy hair and too much curiosity. He asks too many questions, talks while he writes, and once dropped a scroll in the rainwater bucket. But you see something in him, a kind of carelessness that might, someday, become care. You teach him to line his margins. You recite the verse you made up years ago. Ink flows, mind follows. Errors rest in shame. He laughs. Says it sounds like something a poet would say after spilling tea. Maybe he's right. On your day off, one each 10th day, if the quotas are met to, sit at the edge of the city near the old watchtower and write poems. Not good ones, not for anyone but yourself. Here is one. Numbers pass like river foam. Scrolls unwind. The years unfold. I touched an empire once in ink, and only briefly. You don't show it to anyone. As the year turns, your desk grows a little more worn. Your robe gets patched again. You learn to nap without wrinkling your papers. You attend one wedding, 3 funerals, and a fire drill that no one took seriously until the scroll storage nearly caught flame. Li Jun improves. He makes fewer mistakes. And one day, while copying the spring remittance from the tea districts of Sichuan, he asks you something you didn't expect. Do you think the emperor even knows we exist? You pause. The brush hovers above the page. Outside, the cherry trees are in bloom. A wind stirs, the bamboo slips. Your eyes ache, as they always do at this hour. You answer slowly, I don't know. But he knows the numbers, and we made the numbers. That seems to satisfy him. Years from now, he may forget your name, The scrolls you copied will be eaten by silverfish or dust, but the work, quiet and constant, will linger woven into the Empire's bones, just as it always has. Let's now wander into a different time, a different place, where duties were heavier than daggers and service meant silence. A world neither crowned nor cursed, just recorded. And now, let's drift into a new corner of forgotten history. This time, we find ourselves not among scrolls or scribes, but in the shadowed alleys of a stone-walled city beneath moonlight and suspicion. A time when daggers meant duty, but silence was everything. Yet even in a world of poisons and plots, the assassin's life was rarely one of glamour. It was, more often, an endless tedium of waiting, watching, and being terribly, terribly hungry. Asterisk. Story 3. Daggers and Diets. Why it sucked to be a medieval assassin, not so secret, not so glamorously cold. You've been cold for hours. The stone tiles beneath your belly are damp, despite the dry season. The alley smells faintly of onions, coal smoke, and someone's chamber attempted earlier than usual. You shift slightly, adjusting the fold of your tunic where it's pressing against your ribs. A sharp edge digs into your side. The blade. Always the blade. It's not like the ones sung about in epics. It's not curved or jeweled or laced with a tragic backstory. It's just a rust-resistant iron triangle with a high-drapped hilt, easy to grip, easier to drop, especially if your hands sweat, which they often do, because you're an assassin, at least. That's what they call you. You prefer the older term, knifer, or silence man in the street can't. The quiet one, the shadow, the one who listens more than they speak. You've been in this alley since dawn. Why? Because your target, a minor nobleman with an unfortunate tendency to over-collect taxes and underpay, guards, has taken to changing his routine. You suspect he knows something's wrong. He no longer walks the same path to the bathhouse, no longer speaks to the same fishmonger. He eats indoors now. Paranoia, a sign you're doing your job well. Unfortunately, it also makes your job harder. Your stomach growls. You didn't eat this morning. Couldn't nerves knot your belly too tight, and food slows you down. You once tried swallowing half a loaf of barley bread before a job, only to spend the entire night burping while crouched in a chimney. Never again. The alley grows darker. As the sun sinks, the city isn't big, just a small river-fort settlement with one temple, 2 taverns, and an oversized administrative hall. The streets wind too tightly for horses. Foot traffic dies down after sunset. The walls are watched, but the alleyways, not so much. That's why you're here. You think about the stories, the ones the bards tell, how assassins leap from roof to roof, how they disappear in smoke, how they fight 12 men at once with nothing but a dagger and a good haircut, lies all of it. You tried leaping from a roof once, twisted your ankle, nearly bit your tongue in half. There's no smoke, just sweat and fear and the slow crawl of time. You shift again. The nobleman's house stands across the lane, tall, imposing. 1 guard on the door, 2 watching the back entrance. A dog, maybe. You haven't seen it, but you can smell it. Fur and old meat. That's a problem. Dogs remember you. Faces, smells, footfalls. You exhale slowly. You won't strike tonight. You're not ready. The window won't open. The routine isn't certain. The wind is too loud. You rise silently and melt into the city. You return to the safe house. It's not glamorous either. just a storage cellar under the home of an apothecary who owes your brother a favor. You sleep on a straw pallet between barrels of vinegar and pickled fish. The smell has long since ceased to bother you. You've begun to associate it with safety. You light a single oil lamp. You remove your blade and set it on a folded cloth. You remove your boots. Shake out the dust. You stretch. Your knees pop. You're 26. Your knees shouldn't pop. You think about the nobleman again. What is he doing right now? Probably chewing on a duck leg, drunk on almond wine. He has no idea how close he came tonight. Or maybe he does. Maybe he hires 2 new guards tomorrow. Maybe he changes homes. Maybe he flees. That would be ideal, because you don't enjoy killing people. Not really. It's messy, loud, unpredictable. 1,000 ways to go wrong. The better jobs are the ones where you're never seen. A threat slipped into a servant's ear. A message nailed to a stable door. A glint of a dagger seen once, and then never again. Fear can do your work for you. You eat a few pickled carrots from a jar. They're soft, over-brined. You eat them anyway. Sleep is difficult. The straw itches. The vinegar stings your eyes. Somewhere above, someone drops a pan. You curl around your blade, just in case. In the morning, you visit ATANNERY. It's loud, wet, noisy enough to disguise a meeting. Your contact is there. He doesn't look like anything special, just another man rolling hides. But you know his boots are too clean for this. Place, he nods once. Slips you a token in your palm. A new job. No, a warning. The nobleman has received a letter from a cousin in the capital. Your name was in it. Or rather, your description. A pale-eyed knifer with a lampmaker's hands. Not ideal. You'll need to disappear again. You burn the straw mat. Apologize to the apothecary. Move 4 streets north into a stable loft behind a blacksmith shop. You trade a few coins for silence. You lose 3 days. Waiting, listening. Ray-mapping. Then you spot him, the nobleman, walking to the temple, alone or nearly. 1 guard, no dog. The window of possibility reopens, just a crack. You smile, not because you enjoy this, but because it's almost over. You wait, the moment will come soon, it always does. A profession of waiting, hunger, and bad boots. The temple bells are soft in the distance. You crouch behind a lattice wall, part of a storage nook tucked behind the incense sheds. The ground beneath you is dry clay. Your left foot is numb, and you've been here for nearly 4 hours. This is not unusual. People imagine assassins darting from shadows quick, decisive, like a hawk diving on prey. They imagine the strike happens fast, and sometimes it does. But no one ever sings about the hours you spend hiding in latrines, or the time you sat under a butcher's stall for 12 hours and got fleas. No one writes verses about sore joints and bladder cramps. Waiting is the job. The nobleman your target is inside the temple. He has entered at last, just before sunset. Not through the main hall, but a side door, flanked by a single servant and 1 guard. The servant remained outside. The guard entered with him. That complicates things. You don't like killing guards. Most of them are just men who need work. Poor families, bad backs. A few have debts to the wrong magistrates, or wives with sick lungs. They hold a sword not because they enjoy violence, but because they enjoy eating. Still, if he stays too close, there won't be a choice. You remain crouched. The lattice digs into your spine. The crickets have grown louder. Your hand rests on the cloth bundle at your hip. It contains your blade, a wax-sealed note, and a small ball of powdered nightshade, just enough to make someone sleep for half a day. Not a poison, not this time. You try not to kill unless the contract demands it. This one does. The nobleman's ledger is long, not just greedy, but cruel. A list of vanished servants, vanished wives. He hires debt collectors from the docks who use sticks instead of paper. People disappear near his lands, and someone, somewhere, with enough silver to pay for your silence, wants him gone. So you wait. Again, 3 nights later, you make your move. It's not dramatic, not like the stories. There is no leap, no somersault, no flash of steel in moonlight. Just a quiet corridor. The nobleman is walking home, his guard dismissed off, chasing a servant who fled with 2 coins and a comb. He thinks himself safe. He walks beside the temple wall, under the long shadows of the cypress trees. You match his pace, 3 steps behind, then 2. Your boots are soft-soled, cut from old deer hide. You wrapped the seams in boiled cloth to muffle your steps. The blade is warm in your hand. You hold it upside down, edge outward. A cleaner stroke. The nobleman stumbles on a stone. You step forward, just enough. 1 hand over the mouth, 1 swift motion under the ribs. A breath escapes him, wet and confused. No. Screams. No dramatics. You lower him gently to the ground. The cypress needles cushion the fall. You leave a wax-stamped letter tucked into his sleeve. No name, just a symbol, the sigil of the old debt tribunal. They'll understand. You vanish into the alley before the bells ring. You don't sleep that night. You rarely do after a job. Your hands still ache from gripping the hilt too tight. Your back itches from where your tunic stuck to the sweat on your spine. You keep replaying the movement, the angle of the blade, the timing, the breath that passed through your fingers. You weren't followed. You're sure, but you still check the door 4 times. You close the shutters. You burn the tunic. You sharpen the blade knot because it needs it. But because the ritual comforts you, then you eat. It's the first full meal you've had in days. Just boiled lentils, half a root vegetable, and a sweet plum you'd hidden under a floorboard. You chew slowly. The food tastes sharp and foreign after so much hunger. You write in your notebooks, mole palm-sized, bound in cracked leather. You don't keep names, never names, but you note the method, the timing, the error. Guard left corner unlit, 2-minute delay, right flank blind, used cypress cover. You filled 4 of these books, each one hidden in a different city. A week later, you get word of your next job. This one is strange. It comes in the form of a riddle, tucked into a loaf of bread delivered by a blind beggar. Strike. Not for coin, but for the silence it buys. 3 candles, 1 snuffed, 1 flickers, 1 glows. You know who sent it. There are guilds quiet, unofficial ones. Networks of those who do what you do. They have their own signals. Sometimes they pull on your sleeve. Other times they disappear you without warning. This is a pull. It means someone important is watching. You accept, cautiously. You don't like guild politics, too much ceremony, too many rules, but refusing is dangerous. The next job is further. Inland, a merchant town, famous for walnuts and woven carpets. A man who whispers the wrong things into the ears of visiting tax collectors. Someone's trying to keep him quiet. You pack your blade, 3 shirts, and 2 coins, and you walk. The road is long. The weather shifts. Your feet ache. You think not, for the first time, about giving it all up, becoming a dyer's apprentice, a stable hand, a spice merchant's bodyguard, something less lonely, something that doesn't involve hiding under floorboards and pretending you don't exist. But then, what would you do with your silence? You reach the town by dusk. You sleep in a hayloft. You watch the man. You wait, and the cycle begins again. The weight of quiet work. You've learned something strange. Here, in this merchant town of dyed wool and cracked roads, it's not about your target, though he, like many before, is more boast than danger. No, it's about the way people walk. You've started to notice how fear bends the spine, how ambition shortens the stride, how a liar will glance over their shoulder more often than a thief, and how no one, not even the bravest, ever truly walks without listening. You know this because that's all you do, listen and walk. Your boots are worn thin. The stitching is coming loose along the edge. You've mended them twice with borrowed thread and a fishbone needle. They won't last a month, but they're quiet. You walk these streets daily now, always unnoticed. The walnut merchant, the carpet weaver, the smith who sings to his tools, none of them see you. You are part of the scenery. Another figure in a brown hood. Another quiet soul with nowhere to be. And it suits you. The man you've been sent to follow lives above a bakery. He likes to eat honeyed bread with almonds in the early morning. He has 3 robes, one blue, one grey, one the colour of dried mint. He speaks softly, but always to the wrong people. He tells travellers from the coast that the kingdom is weakening. He suggests certain dukes have grown fat with tribute, that maybe someone should tip the scales. You don't know who paid for the silence, but it's your job to deliver it this time. The job is different. The guild didn't ask for blood. They asked for silence, the kind that spreads like ink in water. No scream, no wound, just a memory that fades from every room. He enters, so you watch him. Then you learn his habits. You bribe his candlemaker to use cheaper. Waxed you arrange for his favorite singer to leave town early. You slip a warning under the baker's door unsigned, suggesting the man above has spoken ill of the Duke's guard. And then, one night, you sneak into his room not with a dagger, but with a small vial of grey powder, just enough to turn a man's dreams sour for a week. You leave a Marcan old guild symbol carved in chalk behind the bed frame. Not a threat, a memory, a whisper to be quiet. You don't return. The next week, the man is different. He walks with hesitation, he speaks less. He starts to wear duller colors, and when the next coastal caravan arrives, he says nothing. The silence has taken root. This is, perhaps, your favorite kind of job. No need for blood. No shallow grave in a barley field. No bitter aftertaste of violence. Just quiet. Still, it doesn't mean your life is any easier. The guild sends word. They're pleased. They pay you not in coin, but in permission. You're allowed to travel east to the border towns where the jobs pay more but carry more risk. You accept, not because you want riches, but because the more obscure the town, the more peace there tends to be after the job is done. You pack your things, which is to say, your blade, your boots, and a satchel of lentils wrapped in cloth. You don't carry keepsakes, no photos, no relics. That sort of thing gets you killed. The less there is of you, the better. The road east takes you through marshy lowlands. You walk for 3 days without seeing another traveler. You sleep in sheep, pens, barn lofts, once even the empty ruin of an old stone granary. The work is slow. There's nothing to do but think. You think about the way your hands don't shake anymore, the way your breath remains steady even when someone shouts nearby. You think about how lonely it is to move through the world like smoke scene only. When someone else burns, you don't even know how many jobs you've done. Not really. Some were half jobs, just a warning. Some were shadows. Some were moments so quiet you've nearly forgotten them yourself. You write in your notebook each night small notes, observations, sketches of floor plans, lists of mistakes not to repeat. Never follow someone through a butcher's. Door back rooms too cluttered. Clay tiles echo more in spring. Dogs always remember. You flip back through the pages, searching for meaning. But there isn't much. Just a life lived between footfalls. Your final job in the East is unusual. It's for a monk, not a wealthy one, just a scroll keeper in a small mountain monastery. He suspects one of his brothers is passing secrets to mercenaries. Maps, mostly, or troop movements. Something to do with a border skirmish that no one wants to talk about. He doesn't want you to kill him. He just wants you to make it. Stop, so you do. You slip into the scriptorium one night, blot out a map, leave behind a different one. You mix a sleeping draft into the brother's wine only once. You let him wake in a field, far from home, confused and tired. He doesn't return. No one questions it. The monk thanks you with a small loaf of sweet bread and a woolen scarf. You eat the bread slowly, savoring it. You wear the scarf even now. Sometimes you wonder what life would have been if you'd taken the path of the sword. Open battles, honor, songs. At least your enemies would know your name. But that path is loud, and it ends fast. Yours is slower, colder. It never truly ends. But in your silence, there is purpose. You don't fight for crowns or gold or names etched in stone. You fight for stillness, for the quiet lives that continue unshaken, for the baker who never knows how close danger came, for the monk who keeps copying scrolls in peace, for the child who grows up not fearing the man with two many secrets you'll never be sung about. But that was never the goal, and in that quiet, your footsteps vanish into the dust of time. Let's now wander into a different time, a different place. Story 4. The lost art of medieval laundry. How people washed their clothes without washing machines, the rhythm of water and wool. You find yourself on the edge of a medieval village. It's early, not quite sunrise. The sky is a heavy, soft blue, the color of old parchment soaked in milk. Crows mutter drowsily from the trees above. A sleepy rooster calls out across the thatched rooftops. And down by the river, the village's lifeline, you see them gathering. A small group of women, shoulders hunched under shawls. One carries a basket. Another drags a bundle wrapped in waxed cloth. You watch as they settle onto the worn stones of the washing place, their voices hushed, their movements practiced. It's laundry day. Asterisk, you might not think of laundry as a ritual, but in the medieval world, it was. Clothes weren't changed daily. That was a luxury few could afford. Underclothes might be swapped every week or so more often if you were wealthy, or especially sweaty but outer garments. Tunics, cloaks, hose, those were worn and reworn, mended and brushed, until the dirt was undeniable. Washing clothes wasn't done in one's own home, not usually. It took space, it took tools, it took time, and it took water. Lots of it, so people gathered. not just for necessity, but for rhythm. Laundry had its own calendar, its own habits, and in many ways, its own world. Asterisk, let's linger here. At the water's edge, this river is slow-moving, shallow in the summer months, wider in spring. The banks are worn smooth where generations of washerwomen have knelt, leaning over flat stones. Slick with moss and soap, you can smell wet wool and wood smoke. The chill of early dew rises from the grass. There's a rhythm to the work. First, garments are sorted. Linens in one pile, woolens in another. The dirtiest are set aside, those will need soaking. Then comes the water fetching. Buckets are dipped, carried, poured into shallow wooden troughs. The sound is steady, splash, slosh, drip. Then the clothes are soaked, scrubbed, beaten with wooden paddles called beetles, or sometimes trampled under bare feet in shallow basins. But before the water, before any vit, comes the ash. Ash was the medieval world's version of soap, not the fragrant bars we know today, not even the rough soap of the 18th century. This was a potent, caustic substance created by pouring water through wood ash. The result was a greyish liquid, slippery and sharp, capable of breaking down grease and lifting grime from linen. And every good housewife or laundress kept a bucket of clean, dry ashes. Oak was best. Willow worked too. Pine ash was too oily to resinous. The ashes were placed in a cone-shaped cloth bag, or sometimes just in a wooden sieve, and hot. Water was poured through slowly, seeping out pale and biting. This was mixed with water in large cauldrons, often heated over a low fire, to prepare the wash. If you're picturing a quiet riverbank and a steaming cauldron of lye beside its shore, not far off, though it's worth noting, lye was dangerous. If not diluted properly, it could bleach fabric too harshly. It could burn skin. It could ruin wool in seconds. So it was used carefully, measured by eye, adjusted by feel. The laundresses knew its moods. They trusted their hands more than any written guide. And so, under the early sun, you watch a woman stir her lye vat slowly. Her hands are red from the cold water, but sure. A woolen cap hides her hair, and her sleeves are rolled up high. She murmurs something to her neighbor about the color of last week's flax. Then she dips a sustained shift into the steaming mixture and waits. Asterisk, not all laundry happened outdoors. In wealthier towns and cities, there were lavors, public washhouses, often built near springs or aqueducts. These were covered spaces with stone troughs for scrubbing and rinsing. In France, England, and parts of Italy, they became important communal spaces, places where news was exchanged. Jokes shared, grievances aired. You might find a dozen women at once in a lavoir on washing day, each with her own rhythm, her own patch of stone, but each part of the same quiet orchestra. The slap of wet linen against stone, the hiss of hot water, the creak of wooden paddles. Lavoirs were sometimes gifted to towns by noble families or local abbeys, a small gesture of civility in an otherwise difficult life. In some places, they had rules posted. No spitting, no foul language, no men allowed after dark. They were places of work, but also sanctuaries of routine. Asterisk, and it wasn't just women who did laundry. In monasteries across Europe, laundry was the quiet task of lay brothers, monks who didn't read Latin or copy manuscripts, but served the abbey in manual labor. Washing the robes of the brethren was a sacred duty. It was done with humility, care, and a kind of meditative attention. In Cistercian abbeys, laundry was often done weekly, though outer robes, might only be washed monthly or seasonally. The white robes of the monks were difficult to maintain. They stained easily. They grayed quickly in the sun. But the brothers took pride in their cleanliness. It was a sign of spiritual purity, as well as earthly discipline. The laundry buildings in large abbeys were often elaborate two-story structures with heated basins, drying lofts, and stone drainage channels. In winter, steam filled the air, curling out through open slats. In summer, linens were dried on wooden frames or stretched over long hedges in the sun. Can you smell the damp cloth? The faint ash, the mossy chill of stone underfoot. Let your imagination drift there, among robes, folded with precision, among hands raw from scrubbing, yet steady with purpose. Asterisk, not all washing was gentle. For wool, especially, something stronger was needed. Fulling was the process of cleaning and thickening wool cloth. Raw wool, once spun and woven, was still oily with lanolin and streaked with dirt from sheep pastures and handling. So it had to be treated in the earliest times. Fulling was done with the feet men would stomp on wet wool in troughs filled with a mix of water and urine. Yes, urine. Human waste was rich in ammonia, which broke down grease and helped set dyes. In Roman times, fullers were taxed for the collection of urine, which was stored in large pots at public urinals. Medieval fullers inherited the practice. In larger towns, they worked in designated fulling mills, using wooden hammers powered by water wheels to beat the cloth. It was hard work. The air was pungent. The cloth had to be rinsed again and again to remove the sharp scent. But it worked. The wool came out thicker, stronger, almost felt. Imagine a cloaked traveler on a rainy road, the water sliding off his shoulders, the wind caught in the folds of his tightly woven hood. That warmth came from fulling, from the quiet, smelly, necessary art of cleansing cloth until it could withstand a storm. Asterisk, there were rhythms to laundry, weekly for underclothes, perhaps monthly for TUNICS, seasonal for bed linens, heavy cloaks, altar cloths, or festival garb. But some washing was dictated by occasion. A noblewoman preparing for a feast might demand that her servants freshen her table linens. The night before, ironed under a hot stone. Dusted with lavender, a midwife might ask for boiled linen wraps, washed thrice to ensure softness, ready for the birth of a child. A widow might scrub her husband's shroud in the silence before dawn, the fabric weeping into the river one final time. These were the unrecorded rituals, quiet, water-bound acts of care. Laundry not as duty, but devotion. Asterisk, by now, the sun has risen higher. The women at the riverbank laugh softly as they rinse the final garments. One carefully lays out a linen, shift on a sloping rock, letting the sunlight strike it just so. Another wrings a woolen tunic with practiced strength, her fingers red from the cold. The air smells of ash, soapwort, and wet grass. You lie back in the warm, still field and close your eyes. The world around you is slow, gentle, steeped in small, necessary work. Even the river seems to hum a lullaby. And here, in this quiet pocket of time, you begin to understand something simple but easy to forget. Clean clothes were once a miracle, and the people who made them so thorough, washerwomen, the monks, the fullers in their steaming mills, were quiet magicians. Not heroes, not nobles, but keepers of softness, of hygiene, of dignity. You might never know their names, but your dreams tonight are lined in clean linen, thanks to their hands. Asterisk, and so we rest, here, beside the water's edge, where clean cloth flutters in the breeze, and history clings softly to the stones, drying lines, starch pots, and the scent of lavender in the grass. And now, dear listener, we return to that quiet morning world. Let your mind sink gently into the folds of history once more. You're still near the water's edge, where cool mist rises from the stream and laundry flaps softly in the early breeze. The heat of the lye is fading, and the hard work of scrubbing is done. But this story isn't over not yet. For the act of laundering in the Middle Ages did not end with rinsing, drying, folding, starching, smoothing, scenting. All had their place in the long, slow dance of caring for cloth. So let's stretch time a little further and follow the damp linens as they make their way from water to wind, from utility to beauty. You're in no hurry, let's begin again. Drying days and sunlit hedges after the scrubbing. Rinsing and wringing. The garments are heavy with water, not dripping, perhaps, but still soaked through with effort. In the medieval countryside, drying was not done on thin wires strung between poles. Instead, cloth was spread across the land itself. Large linens bedsheets, altar cloths, undershirts were laid over clean hedges, grassy fields, or even roofs that slanted toward the sun. In some villages, designated drying greens were maintained. Open communal fields kept free of livestock and dung, so that freshly washed garments could lie flat in the light. The sun did more than dry it, whitened. The bleaching power of sunlight was well known, even if not fully understood. Households kept careful watch over bright days, planning their wash around stretches of fair weather. A cloudless sky meant better odds for the laundry to dry swiftly and avoid mustiness. Wool, of course, required special care. Too much sun and it could shrink or felt. Too much wind and it might flap away. So cloaks and tunics were often hung carefully over thick beams or wooden racks near the hearth, or even inside a barn. They were pulled into shape by hand, smoothed out again and again, the way you might gently press out a crumpled page. Drying was slow work. It invited watching, tending, a moment to sit, to chat, to wait, and waiting. In the medieval world was a skill in itself. He scent of cleanliness. You might not think of medieval laundry as fragrant. And yet, even without modern perfumes or detergents, people scented their clean garments with care. Herbs and flowers played a quiet role. Lavender, rosemary, thyme, and sweet woodruff were favorites, especially among the better-off households. Sachets of dried blossoms were tucked into linen chests or scattered between layers of folded cloth. The idea was not to mask the natural smell of the fabric, but to lend it a whisper of the garden. In monasteries, rosemary might be burned as incense in the laundry lofts. In noble homes, bedsheets were sometimes sprinkled with rosewater or elderflower infusion. Even the ashes used in lye could carry a faint, comforting spiciness, depending on the type of wood burned. Laundresses sometimes bundled aromatic plants, lavender, marjoram, hyssopand, laid them in the troughs where garments soaked, letting the scent infuse gently into the weave, and of course, the scent of the sun itself, earthy, faintly metallic smell of dry grass and warm linen was its own kind of perfume. It was a quiet luxury, but a real one. Starching and smoothing not, all garments were left loose and flowing. In the later Middle Ages, certain styles demanded stiffness, crisp necessity in the clothing of the wealthy or the religious elite. That's where came in. Starch was made from natural sources, wheat bran, elder root, or even grated soapwood, boiled until thick. The mixture was strained and applied to collars, cuffs, coifs, and sleeve linings, then dried carefully and ironed smooth. But ironing in the medieval world didn't involve a flat metal plate with a cord and plug instead. Smoothing was done with slick stones, wooden rollers, or glass slickers. Rounded tools passed slowly and evenly over damp fabric to flatten creases. In England, slick stones were passed down through families, and in some records, they were even left to daughters in wills. Monasteries had more formal smoothing methods. Heated stones or brass paddles might be used on ceremonial robes or altar linens. Everything had to be perfect. No wrinkles were allowed when laying the altar cloth for high mass. It was said the cloth should fall in perfect corners, like untouched snow. For wealthier households, smooth linen was a mark of pride, cleanliness on display. Pressed into the fabric itself, asterisk laundry in castles and royal courts. Let's climb. Now, from the riverbanks to the high halls of a medieval castle, you might imagine that queens and knights were spared the business of laundry, and in one sense they were, but only because they had servants to do it for them. In a large castle, laundry was its own department, sometimes referred to as the laundry office or simply the laundress's domain. Royal laundresses could number in the dozens. They reported to a senior female servant or a stewardess who managed their work with quiet precision. The Queen's linens were washed separately from the King's. Her underclothes, her nightchiefs, her headdresses, each was catalogued, cleaned, and folded with care. For noblemen, especially those on campaign, laundry had to be light, frequent, and travel-ready. The laundresses kept inventories. They marked initials with red thread. They stitched tiny signs of ownerships, sometimes embroidered sigils, sometimes mere crosshatches known only to the household. At court, appearances mattered. A crumpled collar could imply disorder. A stained tunic might bring whispers. Even the laundry reflected rank in 14th century France. King Charles V's royal laundress was paid more than many scribes. She travelled with the court. She carried silks and scented sachets in small cedar chests. She was not a noble, but she held a position of quiet influencer, touched the king's body, if only indirectly, through cloth. Asterisk on the road, soldiers, pilgrims, and the travelling wash. Not everyone had the luxury of a fixed river or a lavoir. Consider a soldier marching from town to town across France during the 100 Years' War, or a pilgrim on the road to Santiago de Compostela, or a merchant following the Silk Road, stopping at caravanserais along the way. Clothes still had to be washed. On the road, laundry was done in streams, ponds, even puddles. Garments were beaten against rocks or kneaded by hand. Soap, if available, was used sparingly. More often, travelers used sand, ashes, or even rough reeds to scrape away grime and drying. That took imagination. Clothes might be laid over bushes, slung over saddle horns, or tied to the ends of spears stuck into the dirt. On sunny days, entire camps would be transformed into fluttering meadows of cloth. In monastic guest houses, pilgrims could request a basin to wash their garments, a small mercy on a long journey. In return, they were expected to be discreet, to leave the space clean, and not to mingle their laundry with that of others. Modesty still ruled, even in hardship. Crusaders, those soldiers of piety and plunder, had more elaborate washing routines. In large camps, laundry was handled by camp followers, women who traveled with the army, providing food, medicine, mending, and cleaning. Laundry was laid out in designated zones, washed communally in large kettles. Some military orders, like the Knights Templar, had detailed rules for washing tunics, cloaks, and armor padding. It wasn't glamorous, but even in war, cleanliness mattered. The body was the vessel of the soul, and the soul had to be kept ready, even in dust and blood. Asterisk superstitions and laundry taboos. Like so many aspects of medieval life, laundry came with its share of beliefs. In rural parts of Ireland and Brittany, it was said that hanging laundry out overnight invited the fairies to meddle. Clothes could be touched by the other world, bringing illness, bad dreams, or sudden loss. In Slavic villages, washing on certain feast days was frowned upon. On the eve of St. Elijah's Day, for instance, it was believed that if thunder struck while clothes were drying, the person who wore them might be cursed with deafness or madness. In parts of Spain, hanging a baby's swaddling cloth outside during an eclipse could trap the moon, making the child sleepless or coel, and in many places, it was considered ill luck to wear freshly washed clothes to a funeral. Death, they believed, clung to the living, and new washed garments were too clean to guard against it. Some beliefs were practical in disguise. Hanging laundry too close to nightfall did risk it getting damp again. Wearing stiff garments too. A funeral could cause fainting in the heat. But medieval people lived in a world where the veil between cause and consequence was thin. Laundry, too, had its mysteries. Asterisk, the language of linens. Cleanliness spoke volumes. A white tunic, freshly laundered, was not just about hygiene. It was about morality, spiritual purity, the whiter-than-snow language of psalms. Nuns in starched wimples, altar boys in folded surplices, virgins in wedding shifts, woven from bleached linen spun by their mothers. Laundered garments carried status. In market towns, young girls might present themselves in newly washed aprons on feast days, their sleeves folded back just so. It was a way of saying, I am cared for, I am respectable, I have time to wash my clothes. Even the poorest beggar, if freshly washed, might be offered more sympathy than one who was not. And for women especially, clean laundry became an unspoken language, one of discipline, skill, and quiet pride. To fold a tunic neatly, to scent a shift with rosemary, to stitch initials into a collar. These were acts of love and labor, carried out daily, unnoticed by many, but foundational to society. Asterisk, the day ends. Folds of ritual, rhythm, and quiet disappearance. Asterisk, the seasons of soap and suds laundry was rarely a daily or even weekly occurrence in most medieval households. It followed the seasons just as surely as planting or harvesting. Work was dictated not by the clock, but by the calendar. Spring was the favored time for heavy washing. As the frost lifted and streams flowed freely again, communities began their great washings. Sometimes collectively, there were feast days, yes, but also cleansing weeks, when old garments were beaten free of the past. Winter's soot, sweat, and stiffened grime had to be coaxed from wool and linen with soft water warmed over hearthstones. Summer allowed for more frequent light washings. Bright sun, linen dried quickly, often within a few hours. The heat bleached garments to a paler tone. And thanks to herbs and flower beds in bloom, rinse water could be perfumed with rosemary, lavender, or chamomilus, especially in monastic settings or wealthier manors. Autumn, on the other hand, was a final opportunity for deep cleaning. Blankets, cloaks, and bed linen were washed before being packed away. But winter was the enemy of laundry. frozen streams, cold winds, and sluggish drying made washing nearly impossible. During these months, people leaned more heavily on dry methods, brushing, shaking out dust, or airing garments near fires. You didn't do the laundry every Monday as we might today. You waited until the world itself was ready to help you. Asterisk washerwomen and the silent hierarchies in towns. Especially from the 13th century onward, laundry work became professionalized. Women who made their living from washing were known by many names: lavandiers in French regions, washerinnen in Germanic lands, or just washers in English records. They carried heavy baskets on their hips and wrists, darkened by sun and soap. Most washerwomen were not part of official guilds, though a few cities in France and Italy did create semi-recognized washing collectives, giving these women legal protections over wash areas and price setting. But in most cases, they occupied the lower rungs of the urban labor ladder, visible, essential, but never quite honored, and yet their knowledge was formidable. These women knew the properties of every local water wether, best stones for pounding, the softest water for wool, the quietest corners for drying without risk of theft. They knew which plants could stain cloth permanently and which ones could coax yellow from white. They knew how long to boil a shirt without thinning the threads. Some wealthier households hired full-time laundresses who slept near the kitchens and boiled their water in great copper vats. Their fingers grew raw, but they knew their status rested just above the scullery maid. A laundress in the royal household could even wield informal influence by being privy to stained bedsheets, hurried cleanings, or discreet personal garments. There were whispered stories, too, of nobles who sent out bloodied linens to be washed, and never asked for them back. Of washerwomen who disappeared after noticing too much. But these were rare tales. Most washerwomen endured long days, cold water, and the quiet fatigue of those who worked invisibly until they were missed. Asterisk ritual cleansing and religious symbolism water was not only practical, it was sacred. Throughout the medieval world, cleanliness had spiritual meaning, while the physical body was often treated as secondary to the soul. Acts of washing, especially ceremonial ones, held deep religious significance. Monasteries had their own laundries, sometimes elaborate ones. Monks and nuns maintained strict washing schedules, often tied to the liturgical calendar. They washed not to be fashionable, but to reflect inner purity. Linen underclothes were cleansed before high feast days. Baptismal garments were washed with care, often folded and stored in church chests. In Jewish households, preparations for the Sabbath involved washing both the body and garments. Linen used during Passover was specially laundered and stored apart. In Islamic societies during this period, ritual purity tahara demanded that garments be clean. Before prayer, a requirement that influenced laundry practices across Al-Andalus and beyond. The laundress, in this context, was not merely a worker. She was a custodian of cleanliness, which in turn signified worthiness before God. In one preserved manuscript from a northern Italian convent, a nun writes of her duties in the laundry. On the third day, I scrubbed the robes of the sisters. I wash them in rosemary and read the Psalms while I rinse. The cloth must be clean, for it touches the body that kneels before the Lord. Laundry, in its own quiet way, was a devotional act. Asterisk washing the dead. Final rites and burial cloths. Few acts of laundry were more intimate or more final than preparing someone's shroud. When a person died, especially in rural communities, it was often women who prepared the body. Among their tasks was laundering the burial. Linen, a white or undyed cloth, sometimes reused from older garments. This cloth had to be clean, symbolically and practically. It protected the body from the soil and soothed the living with the sense of order restored. These washings were slow, respectful. The water might be warmed with lavender or myrrh if the family could afford it. The cloth would be aired indoors, never under sun, which could speed decay. In some regions, the cloth was sewn shut only after drying, forming a simple cocoon of peace. Medieval cemeteries have revealed the presence of such shrouds, stiffened by time, folded just so. In some cases, traces of herbal rinses remain in. The fibers to wash for the dead was to perform an act of final service. The laundress, here, became the last hand to care for a soul before it was given to the earth. Asterisk waterways, wood ash, and the ecology of clean what did all this washing mean for the environment? In some ways, medieval laundry was far more sustainable than modern methods. Water was reused, soaps were biodegradable, and fabrics were made to last decades. Linen, especially, could survive dozens of boilings before wearing thin. But there were quiet, ecological consequences. Too much soap, especially lye-heavy solutions, could change the pH balance of small streams. Repeated washings along popular riverbanks led to erosion. The pounding stones left grooves in stone beds. And when cities grew larger, dumping grey water from laundries into rivers added to the build-up of waste that already flowed from tanneries and dye houses in some towns. Regulations emerged to limit where and when laundry could be done. A Paris ordinance from the 14th century reads, "Washerwomen shall not cleanse garments within 50 paces of the dyers, nor shall they dispose of lye water in the main channel." Laundry had become an urban issue, part of the negotiation between survival, cleanliness, and the shared commons of water. Asterisk, the disappearance of the washer's world by the 17th and 18th centuries. New materials, technologies, and expectations began to change laundry forever. Imported cotton replaced linen in many regions. It was easier to bleach and easier to stain. Soap, once homemade, became industrialized. The rhythms of seasonal washing gave way to more frequent expectations. Washboards, wringers, and basins entered homes. Steam replaced sun. What had once been a craft became a chore. Washerwomen, once central in town economies, were increasingly marginalized. Machines did what they once did by hand. Their knowledge faded, their status slipped. By the 20th century, many had vanished from public life entirely, their legacy hidden in laundromat, signage, and children's rhymes. But something remains, in the gentle hum of a washing machine, in the scent of dried linen in sunlight, in the careful folding of a cloth napkin. There is still a faint echo of the world they shaped. Asterisk, final folds and gentle reflection. Suve now walked the full circle of medieval laundry, from hearth to stream, from garments to graves, from ritual to routine. There is something quietly powerful about this history. It tells us that care did not require status, that cleanliness, though often thankless, was once an act of service, that folding cloth could be a form of love. So the next time you handle clean fabric, whether it's a shirt or a shroud, a towel, or a tablecloth, perhaps you'll remember those silent hands by the river, the ones that washed by moonlight, the ones that wrung with calloused fingers, the ones that folded quietly and disappeared. What other histories might still live between the seams? Story 5. The scribes who spoke in silence, bureaucrats of ancient Japan's Heian Tink, screens and the gentle art of not being seen. Asterisk, a world behind screens. in the long stretch of Japan's Heian period spanning from 794 to 1185 CE power, did not roar. It flowed like a current beneath silence, housed in calligraphy and careful ceremony. And at the heart of this whispering empire sat the imperial court in Kyoto. Then called Heiankyo, the city was orderly, symmetrical, and ceremonial by design. Streets intersected at right angles. Walls were built to guide spirits. Buildings were laid out to match the rhythms of the seasons, the movements of the stars, and the flow of etiquette. But what kept the court breathing were not warriors or merchants. It was a small army of bureaucrats, scribes, clerks, and scholars. Daily labor shaped what could be known and what was remembered. They were not seen often. Many worked behind biobu folding screens of painted silk. These screens served a dual purpose: to partition space and to mask presence. A noble might sit on one side, dictating letters or decisions. On the other side, kneeling with brush and ink, the scribe would listen and write, barely acknowledged. Their job was to make their presence vanish, to become, quite literally, a hand and an ear and nothing more. The tools of a quiet profession, the scribe's tools were deceptively simple, yet chosen with great care. The Fuda writing brush was often handmade, its bristles culled from sheep, weasel, or deer. It required regular trimming and care, not unlike a gardener tending bonsai. The weight of the brush, the spring of its tip, and the way it held ink determined the elegance of the writing. The Suzerain inkstone was a flat basin used to grind solid ink sticks called sumi with water. The act of preparing ink was its own quiet ritual, often done before dawn, when the mind was still and steady. Water was added drop by drop. The ink stick was pressed in slow circles. It could take 15 minutes to prepare the perfect shade. Of black, paper washi was prized, handmade from mulberry bark. It was soft but strong, fibrous yet refined. A scribe knew the texture of every page. Some absorbed ink more greedily. Others allowed the brush to glide. The best papers whispered beneath the bristles. A single page could take hours. And yet, the speed was not the point. In Heian, Japan, the beauty of one's handwriting shodo was considered a reflection of the soul. Calligraphy was not a skill. It was character, revealed. Asterisk schedules written in moonlight. The daily rhythm of a court scribe was aligned to rituals of the palace. Work often began before sunrise. The Heian elite believed morning was the most auspicious time for official tasks. The air was cooler. The spirits were less restless. In the imperial ministry buildings, dedicated to a particular function, records, rites, civil personnel, military scribes gathered by the hundreds. They sat in long rows, inkstones lined up neatly, each scribe with his small writing desk, called a shodai. They copied edicts, transcribed poetry, maintained tax records, reviewed land grants, and logged correspondence. They tracked marriages, deaths, and offerings to the gods. Some recorded omens and celestial observations. Others handled the empire's elaborate calendar system, which needed constant adjustment based on moon phases and imperial preferences. Much of this work was still done by hand, though printing had begun to appear in religious circles. But in court, hand-copied records remained the norm. The touch of brush to paper preserved the dignity of the task. Interruptions were few. Silence was expected. The rustle of paper, the distant flute of a passing performer, or the call of a temple bell were often the only sounds. And then came Lunchhofen, a quiet bowl of rice eaten alone, or beside fellow scribes in mutual respect. Afterward, more copying, more logging, more folding of documents into precise shapes. At dusk, the light grew thin. Lamps were lit, though most scribes preferred to finish before night fell fully. Ice train was a real concern. Errors in a tax ledger could ripple outward, costing villagers weeks of extra rice or drawing the ire of governors. So they worked in daylight, in silence, in rhythm. Asterisk, a quiet ladder of ranked, spite their invisibility. Heian scribes belonged to a carefully ordered bureaucratic structure. There were junior scribes, trained from youth, who copied without question. There were Shasuk assistant secretaries who reviewed documents before passing them upward. At the top were high-ranking officials, sometimes nobles, who issued final approvals. Advancement was slow and subtle. A scribe might spend a decade learning the correct format for petitions or the exact language for formal invitations. He would need to memorize precedents, study poetry to refine his penmanship, and cultivate political neutrality. Family background helped. Many bureaucrats came from mid-level aristocratic families, those not wealthy enough for courtly leisure, but not poor enough to toil in fields. Education was often passed from father to son. Schools operated within temples, where Chinese classics were read by lamplight. Some scribes gained renown not for their personalities, but for their calligraphy. A beautifully written court poem might circulate, praised not just for the words, but the brushwork, a subtle bend in a stroke, the confident balance of ink and emptiness. One scribe, Fujiwara no Sukfisa, became known for his skill in recording court gossip with such elegance that others preserved his journals centuries later not for the information, but the art of its rendering. Asterisk ink as memory, brush as witness. There is a kind of quiet power in knowing things that others forget. Scribes, for all their modesty, shaped the memory of an empire. What they chose to record or omit determined what future generations believed had happened. If a name was misspelled in an edict, it might cost someone land. If a festival was logged incorrectly, it could cause scandal. If a political intrigue was softened by euphemism, a dynasty might survive untainted. They were not judges, they were not priests, but they were witnesses, and yet most of them remain nameless. The brushstrokes survive, but the hands that made them have faded. We know them only through court ledgers, monastery donations, and tax scrolls stored in imperial repositories, forgotten for centuries until unearthed by modern historians. Sometimes a single scribe would leave a note in the margin, copied in haste on the third day of snow, or ink ran dry, refilled at midday. These small intrusions are rare, but they remind us. A real person once bent over that page, eyes narrowed, ink-stained thumb pressed gently to the edge of a scroll. Asterisk letters never sent, words never read in addition to official work. Many scribes, those stationed at noble households, composed private letters. Letter writing was an art in Heian culture. Not only the content, but the choice of paper, the color of ink, and the speed of delivery all carried meaning. A reply written too quickly might suggest desperation. One delayed too long could indicate insult. Even the scent of the paper perfumed, with plum or sandalwood spoke volumes. Some scribes were tasked with crafting these letters for their employers. Love poems, apologies, condolences all, ghost-written in graceful Kona script, folded carefully and handed off to messengers in lacquered boxes. These were not their words, but they wrote them as if they were. carefully, with empathy and precision. Letters were sometimes burned unread, yet the act of writing them mattered. For many scribes, it was enough to know they had captured the right tone, that their employer's honor was upheld, that the curve of a character matched the mood of a season. Asterisk ending in stillnesses, the Heian era began to fade. So too did the world of the court scribe. Power shifted toward warrior clans. New governments formed. Record-keeping became more functional, less artful. Printing replaced brushwork. Scribes became clerks. The beauty drained slowly from the ink. But for centuries, they held sway in silence. They showed us that power doesn't always need voice. That knowledge, handled quietly, can still echo centuries later. That to write something down is to honor its existence. And perhaps tonight, as your eyes grow heavy, you'll remember those who sat behind the screens, who spoke through paper, who folded whole lives into scrolls tied with string. They may not have changed the world, but they wrote it down just as it was. Of calendars, ceremonies, and the written ritual of empire, asterisk, the lunar rhythm, the Heian calendar was lunisolar, meaning it was based on both the phases of the moon and the solar year. Each month began on the new moon, but because 12 lunar months did not perfectly align with the solar cycle, an extra intercalary month had to be added every few years to keep the seasons from drifting. Deciding when to insert that extra month was no small task. It required astronomical calculations, observations of celestial events, and reference to precedent. Scribes, often trained in both Confucian classics and Buddhist cosmology, worked quietly in candlelit corners, consulting star charts and old almanacs to find just the right moment. These calendrical experts worked within the Bureau of Astronomy. On Moreo, a small but influential office within the court, the Bureau employed onmyuji or yin-yang specialists who interpreted celestial signs and managed the calendar's production. But the actual drafting, the copying of dates, the inscription of festivals, the annotations in careful script was done by scribes. Once completed, the calendar was copied and distributed in scroll form to aristocratic households. It was more than a list of days. It was a spiritual guide, a map of omens. Each day was marked not just with a date, but with meanings. Auspicious for childbirth, inauspicious for funerals, lucky for journeys, dangerous for repairs. There were color-coded notations, whispered superstitions. To mark the wrong day for a ceremony could bring shame, more worse. So the court trusted the scribes not only to transcribe accurately, but to interpret correctly. A single smudge of ink could unmake a marriage. Asterisk. Recording the sacred. Much of the scribe's year was devoted to ceremony, not in attending, but in preserving. The Heian court revolved around rituals, the changing of imperial robes for each season, the purification rites before harvest, the New Year's offering to ancestral spirits. And for each of these, there was a protocol, a script, a written memory in a way. Ceremony was the empire's heartbeat and scribes were its steady pulse. When the emperor walked to the great shrine of eyes, it was a scribe who prepared the documents announcing his journey. Another scribe would transcribe the prayers offered to be placed in the shrine's archive. Another would write the names of those present. These lists were not perfunctory. They were sacred records. Their survival ensured the ritual had, in fact, occurred during the Neo-Namesai. The harvest thanksgiving, the emperor would offer rice and wine to the kami, the spirits. Scribes recorded each stage, the time of incense lighting, the order of approach, the wording of chants. If a breeze knocked over a candle, it was noted. If a crow called during the ritual, it was recorded. Omens hid in every detail. Even ceremonies that occurred annually were treated as new each time. The written record had to be fresh. Memory, in Heian culture, was not passive. It had to be rewritten constantly, or it would vanish. So scribes wrote, every year, every word. Again, rituals of paper and form there was. An art to document presentation. A court scribe was not simply a writer. He was a choreographer of paper. Every fold, every seal, every tied ribbon had to follow precise rules. Official letters, known as gokuyo, were folded in a style called toto layered and symmetrical, with corners tucked just so. Petition scrolls were tied with colored cords. Red for ritual, black for civil matters, white for condolences. Mistakes could not be erased. Paper was expensive, ink permanent. So scribes learned to move slowly, carefully, with no wasted motion. At the highest levels of ceremony, documents were not even read aloud. They were presented in silence, passed from hand to hand, each gesture choreographed. A glance, a bow, a step backward. The message was in the ritual itself. Some scribes specialized in ceremonial writing using brushed gold ink on indigo paper, their strokes so fine they seemed printed. These were used only for imperial poems or letters to deities. The more sacred the message, the more beautiful the script. Asterisk whispered corrections. Invisible mistakes even in this quiet world. Errors crept in, but they had to be hidden. A scribe who noticed a mistake could not simply cross it out. That would deface the page. Instead, a tiny slip of white paper shitajikyu was pasted over the error. The correction was rewritten atop it, the paper trimmed, so finely it vanished into the page. If the mistake was in an imperial document, the scribe might have to recopy the entire scrolls, sometimes 10 feet long, starting over with fresh ink. Not for clarity, but for honor. Those who noticed errors made by others faced a dilemma. Pointing them out could humiliate a superior, so corrections were often whispered, or made at night, unacknowledged. Scribes learned discretion early. It was part of the job. Asterisk the ghosts of bureaucracies passed though many scribes lived and worked. In the capital, some were assigned to distant provinces, posted as recorders for governors or tax assessors. There, far from Kyoto, they continued their tasks copying land deeds, translating imperial decrees, sending reports back to the capital. These scribes lived modestly, often in spare temples or government lodges. They wore simple robes, ate local fare, and walked long distances to deliver scrolls by hand. Yet even here, the work was ceremonial. A tax record, if miswritten, could alter a peasant's fate. A land deed, if forged, could rob a village of its fields, so scribes held a quiet kind of power. Archaeologists have found storage pits near provincial temples, filled with fragmentary documents, old census lists, broken seal impressions, the remains of rosters. They are not thrilling artifacts, but they are human ones. Among the names are clue scribes, adding notes in the margins. This village gave millet instead of rice this year, or the ox died before transport, goods delayed. These notes were not meant for history, but they are what remains of it. Asterisk poetry as proof of life is perhaps not surprising that many court scribes also became poets. In a world where emotion was to be written, not spoken, poetry became a kind of outlet, not in public, but in letters, journals, or competitions among peers. Heian poetry was short waka. usually 31 syllables, steeped in seasonal metaphor, a drooping willow, a curtain stirring in wind, the cry of a cuckoo at dawn. These were not just symbols. They were how people said what they could not say directly. A scribe might spend his day writing tax edicts, then pen a verse at night. My ink brush rests now outside. The rice fields shimmer under silver rain. Who will read these characters when I too am dust and ash? Many such verses were never meant to be read, yet they survive in anthologies, hidden among nobler names, anonymous, undated, quiet like the scribes themselves. Asterisk, quiet in a time of change by the 1100s. The Heian order was beginning to fray. Military clans, especially the Taira and Minamortarus, in power. Wars loomed. The court became more symbolic than real, but the scribes kept writing, even as political control passed to the samurai. The scribes remained in the background, copying laws, tracking taxes, issuing ceremonial proclamations in the emperor's name. The rituals continued, even if fewer people cared. One scholar likened them to monks copying sutras in a burning temple. The flames might reach them eventually, but until then, the work mattered. Asterisk, and so we pause. So here we are, hundreds of years later, tracing the brushstrokes of forgotten men who wrote while no one watched. Men who tracked time without clocks, who folded paper into ritual, who made empire out of silence. Perhaps, as you begin to drift, you might picture one of them, kneeling at a low desk, the lamp guttering softly, the ink just beginning to dry. Outside, the crickets have started. Inside, a breath is held. A name is written. The scroll is rolled. The record kept. And you, too, have now become a part of their story. The end of a scroll, the start of a shadow asterisk. A shadow falls on the court. The Heian period, as it is now remembered, did not end with fire or invasion. It ended with quiet erosion. By the late 1100s, political power had shifted away from elegant court into the hands of military clans, most notably the In 1185, the Samaria-led Kamakura shogunate took control. The emperor remained cloistered and ceremonial, but real authority had moved, and with it, the scribes began to lose their place. The aristocratic offices, where scribes once wrote day and night, were now quieter. Some closed entirely. Court rituals continued, but with fewer attendees. Budgets shrank. Scribes, once paid in land or rice tax entitlements, found themselves living with less, and yet they kept writing, asterisk, the rise of the warrior, clerk, while the elegant scribes of the Heian court faded into obscurity. A new kind of writer emerged, the bushi-bugyo, or warrior-bureaucrat. In the Kamakura shogunate, scribes were no longer primarily poets or priests. They were legal clerks, often samurai themselves. They recorded land disputes, wrote out edicts, and managed the logistics of war. Their script was less decorative, more functional, but it still owed a debt to Heian calligraphy, the elegant strokes, the structured formatting, the reverence for the written word. These warrior clerks used brush and ink to record feudal contracts, property transfers, and the rules of engagement. Though their purposes were practical, their methods were ancient. Scrolls tied with string, seals pressed in red ink, precise kanji forming rows of stipulations. In form, the Heian scribes lived on, even in an era that no longer noticed them. Asterisk, the temple keeper's one refuge for the scribal tradition was the Buddhist monastery. Temples had always been guardians of text, From the 700s onward, they had copied sutras by hand, leaving the act itself was meritorious. A perfectly written scroll was not just informative, it was sacred. As the court's influence waned, many scribes retired into monasteries, either by choice or necessity. There they continued their work in the shadow of temple eaves. They copied scriptures. They recorded temple landholdings. They maintained rosters of monks and donors, and managed vast archives. Some monks were former noble scribes. Others were born to temple life, but their hands moved in the same wink brush, gliding across rice paper, steady and slow in temple script. The old rhythms endured, the same paper folding techniques, the same calendar notations, the same ritual care. Asterisk diaries in twilight. One curious survival of the Heian scribes came in the form of personal diaries, known as Nikki. These diaries were not confessional in the modern sense. They were stylized records of daily life, written for memory or posterity. And during the Heian period, many aristocrats, especially women, had kept such records. But by the 1200s, these diaries became increasingly rare. The habit lingered, though, among retired courtiers and monks. One such example is the Tawagatari, the Confessions of Lady Nisho, written around 1300 by a former imperial consort turned nun. In it, she records not only court ceremonies, but dreams, losses, and travels much in the spirit of Heian diarists before her. These documents, often unsigned and left in temple archives, preserve something remarkable: the interior lives of scribes and scholars, long after their offices had closed, in the quiet margins. The tradition lived on. Asterisk the scroll, as a living thing. Scribes of Heian Japan thought of writing not as static, but alive. A scroll was not dead once written. It breathed each time it was unrolled. It aged. It faded. It bore traces of those who handled it. Many scrolls were ritually recopied each generation, not for accuracy, but to renew their spirit. Old texts were not discarded, they were placed in clay jars, sealed in temple walls, or buried in stupa foundations. Even a discarded draft had meaning. Ink-stained scraps were often burned with prayers. Ashes scattered in rivers. So too, perhaps, did the scribes think of themselves, not as fixed roles, but recurring echoes, living, fading, returning through brush and script. Asterisk, the last of the imperial scribes. Even as the medieval period deepened, a few scribes remained at court. Their numbers dwindled, but the office of documents Shikibushke continued to employ. Clerks, often hereditary positions passed from father to son, by the 1500s. Much of their work was ceremonial, writing formal poems for imperial birthdays, preparing scrolls for investitures, translating Chinese envoys' letters into court Japanese. Some of these scribes wrote nothing for weeks. Others maintained ritual calendars, adding annotations each season. Their world grew quieter, but they endured. One 16th century court scribe, whose name has been lost, left behind a note on the back of a prayer scroll: "I am the shadow of a shadow. Still I write." It is all that remains of him. Asterisk echoes in the merchant's ledger. Surprisingly, some of the most lasting legacies of Heian scribes reappeared not in palaces, but in shops. During the Edo period, 1603 to 1868, Japan saw a blossoming of urban culture. Merchants, once considered low status, became wealthy, and with wealth came paperwork, ledgers, inventories, transaction logs. These required clerks. And the clerks, in turn, borrowed from older traditions. Merchant handbooks from the 1700s teach how to fold documents in the manner of court scrolls. Some shops used seal stamps in the Heian style. Even the way accounts were kept right to left, in vertical columns mirrored court habits in this way. The scribe's influence trickled down, no longer elite, but still precise, still present. Asterisk lessons in ink today, if you walk into a Kyoto museum, or open a Japanese calligraphy book, you may find an example of kazushi jikisif, broken characters used in Heian times. Few can read them fluently now. It takes special training, but their form is beautiful, like reeds bending in wind, or wisps of smoke caught mid-air. To the untrained eye, they may seem decorative, but to a scribe, each curve carried weight. Was a misrecording of truth. Modern scholars and artists sometimes recreate Heian-era brushwork not only for beauty, but to reconnect with a forgotten rhythm. A rhythm of patience, of careful repetition, of knowing that no word is written for nothing. Asterisk in the silence after the scrolls. What becomes of those who wrote, when no one remembers their names? The scribes of the Heian court did not die out. They simply faded into other roles. Monks, clerks, teachers, shopkeepers. Their work lived on in paper folds, in brushstrokes, in the quiet expectation that something must be written down. Today, in archives across Japan, you can still see their work, not behind glass, but in boxes. Bundled scrolls, still tied, some with creases from centuries of hands, some still bearing the scent of camphor or ink. You can read, in the faded characters, that someone recorded the number of lanterns burned during a ceremony in 1023. That someone noted the emperor sneezed during a rice offering. That someone copied a calendar in neat rows on a spring afternoon 900 years ago. And perhaps, if you listen closely in that quiet archive, you'll hear the faintest whisper of a brush moving across paper. Asterisk a gentle reflection. Not every legacy is loud. Not every history is heroic. Some are written quietly, in corners, by people who never expected to be remembered, who did their work not for fame or power, but because someone had to be, because the world, even a silent one, needs witnesses. The scribes of the Heian court were not warriors. They were not kings, but they shaped time. They preserved memory, and they taught us that writing, at its core, is an act of care. So, if your eyes are growing heavy, and the hush of their world feels, close, let it. You are not far from them now, just a breath away, just a whisper of ink on paper.